Before we begin our tale tonight, I invite you to leave the weight of the day outside the door. Imagine just for a moment that you are stepping out of the cold, rushing world and into a sanctuary built of stone and silence. You are entering a vast, ancient library. Can you see it? The walls are lined with shelves that reach up into the shadows of the high ceiling, filled with books that hold the secrets of centuries. The air here is warm, thick with the comforting scent of old paper leather bindings and the faint, sweet aroma of wood smoke from the hearth. Walk with me toward the fireplace. The flames are dancing, casting a soft golden glow across the velvet armchair that waits just for you. Sit down. Feel the support of the chair beneath you, sinking into the softness. You are safe here. The storm outside cannot touch you. It only serves to remind you of how warm, how dry, and how protected you are right now. Let's take a deep breath together to signal to your body that it is time to rest. Inhale deeply through your nose, filling your lungs with this warm, quiet air, and exhale slowly, letting go of any tension in your shoulders, your jaw, your hands. Again, breathe in, inviting stillness, and breathe out, releasing the noise of the day. Your eyelids are growing heavy. The sound of the rain against the tall glass windows is a rhythmic lullaby, washing away your thoughts, washing away your worries. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be. Just listen to the rain. Just listen to the story. Tonight we open a book bound in deep crimson velvet. A story you may think you know, but tonight we will walk through its pages slowly. We will feel the cold of the forest and the warmth of the enchanted castle. We will discover the beauty hidden within the beast. Let the words wash over you like a gentle wave. Let us begin. Once, long ago, in a land where the forests were thick and the winters were unforgiving, there lived a merchant named Laurent. Laurent was a man who had known the dizzying heights of great fortune and the crushing weight of sudden loss. There was a time when his ship sailed every sea, returning with holds, bursting with spices from the east, silks of the deepest indigo, and gold that glittered like trapped sunlight. "Steady now, steady," he whispered to his horse, though the wind stole the words from his lips. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time loses its meaning in the white void of a storm. Laurent was freezing. His breath came in shallow, painful gasps. He thought of his children. He thought of the disappointment on their faces when he returned empty-handed. He thought of Camille and the simple rose she had asked for, a promise he could not even keep. He was ready to lay down in the snow and let the cold take him. It would be so easy, just to close his eyes, just to sleep. But then, a light. Through the swirling vortex of snow, a faint golden glow appeared. It was steady, unblinking, unlike the chaotic flash of lightning. Laurent rubbed his eyes, thinking it a hallucination of a dying mind, but the horse saw it too. The animal whinnied, a sound of desperate hope, and turned towards the light. As they stumbled closer, the trees seemed to part. The wind, which had been tearing at them with savage fury, suddenly died down. The snow stopped falling, suspended in the air as if by an invisible barrier. Before him stood a gate. It was wrought of iron, twisted into shapes of vines and thorns, towering high into the gloom, and beyond the gate, a castle. It was not a ruin as one might expect in such a deep, forgotten part of the forest. It was magnificent. Lights glowed from every tall, arched window, casting warm, inviting rectangles of gold onto the pristine snow. The gate creaked open on its own, a slow, welcoming groan of metal. Laurent hesitated. This was strange. This was impossible. But the warmth radiating from the courtyard was undeniable. It smelled of summer, of blooming flowers and green grass, a stark, impossible contrast to the frozen hell he had just escaped. He led his horse into the courtyard. Here the air was balmy. He could see stables to the left, the doors standing open. "Is anyone there?" he called out. His voice echoed off the stone walls, but only silence answered. He stabled his horse, finding the manger filled with fresh, sweet hay and a trough of clean water. The poor beast began to eat greedily. Laurent patted its neck, grateful, and turned towards the massive front doors of the castle. They were carved from dark wood, polished to a shine. As he reached out his hand to knock, they swung inward, silently, smoothly, revealing a grand hallway bathed in the light of 1,000 candles. He stepped inside. Hello, silence. But not an empty silence. It was a silence that felt waiting. He had lived in a mansion where laughter echoed in every hall, raising his 6 children, in a world where want was a word they never had to learn. But the sea is a fickle mistress. In one cruel season, storms claimed his fleet, swallowing his fortune beneath the grey, churning waves. And so the family retreated. They left the city of lights and moved to a humble cottage on the edge of a deep, ancient forest. The older children, accustomed to idleness and vanity, lamented their fate daily. They missed the balls, the admirers, the endless stream of new gowns, but not Camille. Camille was the youngest. She was possessed of a beauty that was not just of the face, but of the spirit, a quiet, luminous grace that seemed to shine brighter in the darkness of their poverty. While her sisters sighed and her brothers complained, Camille learned. She learned to bake bread until the crust was golden and crisp. She learned to coax vegetables from the stubborn earth. She learned to find joy in the song of a lark or the bloom of a wild rose. One autumn day, a flicker of hope arrived in the form of a letter. One of Laurent's ships, thought lost to the deep, had limped into a distant harbor. It was damaged, yes, but its cargo was rumored to be intact. The cottage erupted in celebration. The older sisters immediately began to list their demands. "Bring me a dress of silk so fine it floats on the air," said one. "Bring me a necklace of pearls, each as large as a moon," demanded another. "Bring us furs, bring us perfumes, bring us back our lives." Laurent, weary but hopeful, turned to his youngest. Camille sat by the hearth, mending a tear in her simple woolen skirt. "And you, my dear Camille," he asked gently, "what shall I bring for you? A jewel? A ribbon for your hair?" Camille looked up, her eyes reflecting the firelight. She thought for a moment. She did not need things. She did not crave possessions that would only gather dust. "Father," she said softly, her voice like a clear bell in the chaotic room, "I only wish for your safe return. But, if you insist, bring me a rose. Just a single rose. They do not grow here in the wild woods, and I have missed their beauty." Laurent smiled, touched by her modesty, and promised her the finest rose he could find. The journey to the port was long, but Laurent's heart was light. He rode his old horse through the winding paths, dreaming of the future he could rebuild. However, dreams are fragile things. Upon arriving at the port, Laurent found a nightmare waiting for him. The ship had indeed returned, but his creditors, men with hearts of stone and ledgers of ink, had seized everything. The cargo was sold before Laurent could even step onto the dock. He argued, he pleaded, he showed them the empty pockets of his coat, but it was no use. After months of legal battles that drained the last of his coins, Laurent was forced to turn back. He was leaving not as a resurrected merchant, but as a broken man. No silk dresses, no pearls, not even a coin to buy a warm meal for the journey home. He rode out of the city as the sun began to set, casting long, bruised shadows across the road. The weather turned as his spirits did. The sky, which had been a dull grey, suddenly bruised into an angry purple. The wind began to howl, a mournful, piercing shriek that cut through his thin coat. Snow began to fall, not the gentle drifting flakes of a winter lullaby, but sharp, icy needles driven by the gale. It was a blizzard born of magic and malice. Laurent urged his horse forward, but the path was disappearing. The familiar landmarks, the twisted oak, the crossing stream, were swallowed by the blinding white. The cold bit into his fingers, numbing them until he could barely hold the reins. Laurent stood in the grand foyer. The silence here was profound, not the empty silence of abandonment, but the hushed, reverent silence of a cathedral. He shook the snow from his coat. The droplets hit the stone floor with tiny, rhythmic taps. Tap, tap, tap. The air was warm, smelling of beeswax and dried lavender. It wrapped around his frozen limbs like a thick woolen blanket. "Is anyone here?" he whispered. His voice drifted up the sweeping staircase, disappearing into the shadows above. No answer, only the flickering of the candles in the wall, sconces which seemed to bow and dance as he passed, guiding him forward. He followed the light. It led him through a corridor lined with tapestries depicting scenes of mythical hunts and star-crossed lovers. The fabric looked soft, inviting touch, but he kept his hands to himself. At the end of the hall, he found a dining room. A massive fireplace dominated the room. Logs as thick as a man's waist were burning with a slow, steady intensity. The flames licked the wood, creating a symphony of pops and crackles that felt like a conversation in an ancient language. And there in the center of the room was a small table set for one. Laurent approached slowly. His stomach gave a low rumble, a stark reminder of his hunger. The table was laid with pristine white linen silver cutlery that gleamed in the firelight, and a feast that looked as though it had been prepared just moments ago. There was a bowl of steaming soup, rich and golden, a loaf of crusty bread still warm from the oven, a roasted bird glistening with herbs, and a goblet of ruby red wine. He waited. He looked around for a host, a servant, anyone, but he was alone. Driven by exhaustion, he sat down. The chair was upholstered in deep velvet, soft and yielding. He picked up the spoon. The soup was hot, savory. It tasted of comfort. It tasted of home. He tore a piece of the bread. Crunch. The crust was perfect, the inside soft as a cloud. As he ate, the tension in his shoulders began to melt away. The cold of the forest felt like a distant memory, a bad dream he was waking up from. The wine warmed his blood, spreading a heavy, pleasant drowsiness through his limbs. "Thank you," he murmured to the empty room. "Whoever you are, thank you." When he had finished, his eyelids felt heavy as lead. He looked at the fire one last time, watching the embers glow like breathing jewels. He didn't even have the strength to find a bedroom. He simply leaned back in the deep armchair, pulled his coat over him, and let the rhythm of the fire lull him into a deep, dreamless sleep. When Laurent opened his eyes, the storm was gone. Sunlight pale and winter clean was streaming through the tall windows. The fire had burned down to soft grey ash, but the room was still pleasantly warm. He stretched his joints, popping satisfyingly. He felt rested, more rested than he had been in years. To his surprise, his old damp clothes were gone. In their place, laid neatly on a stool nearby, was a suit of fine dry clothes, a velvet coat of deep green, a crisp linen shirt, and sturdy boots that looked polished and new. Magic, he whispered, but it was a kind magic, a caring magic. He dressed quietly and made his way to the courtyard. The air outside was fresh and crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine needles. He went to the stable. His horse was waiting, groomed and fed, looking as refreshed as its master. "We must go, old friend," Laurent said, patting the horse's nose. "We have trespassed long enough." He led the horse toward the gate. He intended to leave as quietly as he had arrived, but as he passed a stone archway, a scent stopped him in his tracks. It was a sweet, intoxicating perfume, heavy, floral, and impossible for the season. He turned his head and saw it. A garden, but not just any garden. While the forest outside the gates was buried in snow, this small enclosed courtyard was in the height of an eternal summer. The grass was lush and emerald green. Fountains burbled with crystal clear water, and in the center, climbing a trellis of white marble, were roses, hundreds of them. They were not the pale, fragile roses of a florist's shop. These were wild, ancient things. Their petals were the color of deep crimson velvet, spiraling inward into a secret heart. They glistened with morning dew. Laurent stood mesmerized. He remembered the cottage. He remembered the fire. He remembered Camille. "Just a single rose, father." The promise echoed in his mind. He looked around. The garden was silent. Surely one rose among hundreds would not be missed. Surely the kind host who had provided soup and warmth would not begrudge a father a simple gift for his daughter. He reached out. His fingers brushed the cool, silky petals of the most beautiful blossom. He broke the stem, and the spell was broken. A shadow fell over Laurent, a shadow so large it seemed to swallow the sun. Laurent turned the rose, trembling in his hand. Standing before him was a figure of immense proportions. He was tall, broad as an oak tree, and draped in a cloak of dark fur. His face was hidden in the shadows of a hood, but Laurent could see eyes burning with a fierce golden light, and he could see the glint of tusks, the muzzle of a beast. But when the creature spoke, it was not a roar. It was a voice, deep as a cavern, vibrating with a sorrow that was older than the stones of the castle. "I saved your life," the beast rumbled. "I gave you warmth when the cold sought to take you. I gave you food when hunger gnawed at your bones. And in return, you steal from me." Laurent fell to his knees, the rose slipping from his fingers to the grass. "Forgive me, my lord, I didn't know. I only thought." The beast stepped closer. "You take the one thing I love above all else. My roses." "It was for my daughter," Laurent stammered, his voice shaking. "For Camille. She asked for nothing but a rose. I promised her." The beast paused. The golden eyes narrowed. "A daughter," the voice softened just a fraction. "You have a daughter who asks for roses instead of gold." "Yes," Laurent whispered. She is special." The wind in the garden picked up again, rustling the leaves. The beast seemed to be listening to something Laurent couldn't hear. "Listen to me, merchant," the beast said, his voice low and final. "I will spare your life, but a debt must be paid. A life for a rose." Laurent bowed his head, ready to accept his fate. "Go home," the beast commanded. "Give the rose to your daughter, but you must return. Or, if she is as brave as you say, she may come in your place of her own free will. If she refuses, you must return to pay the price alone." "I cannot ask that of her," Laurent cried. "You will ask nothing," the beast said, turning away, his heavy cloak sweeping the grass. "You will simply tell her the truth. Now go, before I change my mind." Laurent rode through the gate, the rose clutched safely in his coat pocket. The magic summer faded, instantly replaced by the biting cold of the winter forest. But he felt colder on the inside. He was alive, but he carried a heavy burden home. Laurent returned home with the weight of the world on his shoulders. The cottage was warm, filled with the chatter of his children, waiting for their gifts. But when he placed the single wilting rose on the table, a hush fell over the room. He told them of the storm. He told them of the castle. And he told them of the price. "A life for a rose," he whispered, burying his face in his hands. The older sisters wept. The brothers shouted in anger. But Camille simply reached out and touched the velvet petals of the rose. She did not cry. She did not tremble. In that moment she understood that her life was weaving into a larger tapestry, one she could not yet see, but felt compelled to follow. "I will go, father," she said. Her voice was not loud, yet it silenced the room. "The rose was for me. The debt is mine." The next morning the forest was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the world wrapped in a thick white blanket of snow. Camille packed her few belongings, a warm wool cloak, a comb, and her favorite book, a tattered volume of old poetry. The journey to the castle was a blur of white and grey. Camille sat beside her father, watching the trees pass by like silent sentinels. She felt a strange sense of calm. She was leaving the world of noise, of demands, of superficial wants. She was going into the unknown. When the iron gates of the castle appeared looming out of the mist, she squeezed her father's hand. "Go back, father," she said gently. "Do not worry for me. I feel I am expected." She stepped down from the cart. The snow here was untouched, sparkling like diamond dust. She walked through the open gates alone. The heavy iron closed behind her with a final resonant clang, sealing the world away. She was no longer Camille, the merchant's daughter. She was simply a guest of the silence. The castle was exactly as her father had described, yet so much more. It felt alive. As she stepped into the foyer, the candles flickered in greeting. The air smelled of cedarwood and beeswax. "Hello," she called out softly. There was no beast, no monster rushing to devour her. Only the soft ticking of a grandfather clock somewhere deep in the house. Tick, tock, tick, tock. She walked forward, guided by an instinct she couldn't explain. She found the dining room, where a dinner was laid out, steaming, fragrant, and inviting. But she was not hungry for food. She was hungry for rest. She climbed the grand staircase, her hand trailing along the smooth, cool marble of the banister. At the end of the long hallway, a door stood slightly ajar. A golden light spilled out from within. Camille pushed it open. It was a bedroom, her bedroom. A fire was already roaring in the hearth. The bed was a cloud of white linens and down pillows piled high. On the bedside table a single candle burned, and next to it, a vase with fresh water waiting for the rose she still carried in her hand. She placed the rose in the vase. It seemed to sigh with relief, its petals unfurling in the warmth. Camille went to the window. Outside the night was dark and cold. Inside she was wrapped in a cocoon of light. She realized then that this was not a prison. It was a sanctuary. She did not sleep yet. There was one more door she needed to find, one more secret this house held. Wandering down the corridor, Camille found a pair of heavy oak doors. They were tall, carved with intricate vines and leaves. She pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. She turned the brass handle. It turned smoothly, heavy and solid in her grip. She pushed the doors open and gasped. It was not a room. It was a world. Before her lay a library so vast the ceiling was lost in shadow. Floor to ceiling shelves stretched out in every direction, lined with thousands, no millions of books. The scent hit her instantly. It was the most comforting smell in the world. It smelled of old parchment, dry and sweet like vanilla. It smelled of leather bindings, rich and earthy. It smelled of dust motes dancing in shafts of moonlight. It was the smell of 1,000 lives, 1,000 stories waiting to be heard. Camille stepped inside her footsteps, muffled by the thick Persian rugs that covered the floor. She felt small but safe. She walked to the nearest shelf. She ran her fingertips along the spines of the books. Rough leather, smooth silk, cool gold leaf lettering. She pulled a book from the shelf. It was heavy in her hands. She opened it. The sound was sharp and satisfying in the quiet room. She walked over to a massive leather armchair positioned by the fireplace. The leather creaked softly as she sat down, molding to her form. Here, surrounded by the walls of words, Camille felt a profound peace settle over her heart. She was alone, yes, but she was not lonely. She had the company of thinkers, dreamers, and poets from ages past. She read, and as she read, the rain outside began to fall harder, drumming a rhythmic beat against the tall panes of glass. Patter, patter, patter. It was a lullaby for the mind. The fire popped. A log settled in the grate. Camille's eyes grew heavy. The words on the page began to swim. She closed the book, resting it on her lap. She leaned her head back against the chair. She listened to the rain. She listened to the fire. She breathed in the scent of old paper and wood smoke, and for the first time in her life she felt completely, utterly at rest. In the shadows of the upper balcony, a pair of golden eyes watched her, but there was no malice in them, only curiosity, and perhaps a flicker of hope. Time in the castle did not move in hours or minutes. It moved in the turning of pages, in the slow drift of snow against the window pane, in the quiet rhythm of two souls existing in the same space. Camille was no longer afraid. One evening, as she sat reading by the fire, she felt a presence. She did not flinch. She simply looked up. The beast stood in the shadows of the library's upper tier. He was vast, a creature of fur and shadow, but his posture was not one of menace. It was one of loneliness. "Would you like to listen?" Camille asked. Her voice was a soft melody in the stillness. The beast did not speak. He moved forward his heavy steps, muffled by the thick rugs, and sat in the large chair opposite her. He closed his eyes, his great beastly head bowing slightly. And so she read to him. She read of ancient kingdoms and stars that sang. She read of philosophy and the nature of the soul. Night after night this became their ritual. The fear evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Camille stopped seeing the tusks, the fur, the claws. She began to see the stillness in his hands when he held a delicate book. She saw the sadness in his golden eyes when the firelight caught them just so. She realized that the beast was just a mask. a heavy winter coat worn by a soul that had been cold for too long. One night, as the snow outside finally began to melt, revealing the first hints of green in the garden, the beast looked at her. "You have stayed," he rumbled softly. "You have not run." "Why would I run?" Camille answered, closing her book. "Here there is peace. Here I am seen." The beast sighed, a sound like the wind settling in the trees. "Then I am no longer a prisoner," he whispered, "and neither are you." That night, Camille dreamt. In her dream, she was back in the rose garden, but it was not the unnatural summer of her father's visit. It was a true spring. The air smelled of rain-washed earth and blooming lilacs. She saw the beast standing by the trellis, but as the warm wind blew, the dark fur seemed to dissolve like smoke. The heavy shadows lifted, the sharp edges softened. He did not explode into light. He simply faded into clarity. Where the monster stood there was now a man. He was not a prince of gold and vanity, but a man with kind eyes and a weary, gentle smile. A man who had learned the value of silence and the beauty of a simple rose. He reached out a hand. Camille took it. It was warm. "Thank you," he said, and the voice was the same, deep, resonant, familiar. When Camille woke, the castle was silent, but the heaviness was gone. The shadows in the corners had retreated. Sunlight poured into the library, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny stars. She walked to the window. Down in the garden, a man was tending to the roses. He looked up, saw her, and waved. It was no fairy tale ending of fireworks and fanfare. It was something better. It was a quiet morning. It was the promise of a peaceful day. It was the simple, profound joy of being home. And now we leave Camille and her prince in their sanctuary of stone and roses. We leave them to their quiet days and their peaceful nights. They are happy, they are safe, and so are you. The story is closed. The book is returned to the shelf. You are back in the warm, dim library of your mind. The fire is just glowing embers now, a soft, pulsing red light in the dark. Feel the heaviness in your body. It is a good heaviness. Your legs are heavy, sinking into the bed. Your arms are heavy, resting by your side. Your eyes are sealed shut, comfortable and relaxed. The rain outside continues its gentle rhythm. Drop, 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 washing away the last of your thoughts. There is nothing left to hold on to. You can let go, drift past the library, drift past the castle, drift into the velvet darkness of your own sleep. You are safe, you are warm, you are deeply, deeply asleep. Good night.